Hello, I'm Langston, and I'm back today on my channel with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about how each state is trending politically. So I'm going to be starting from west to east. So obviously, the first thing I want to talk about is Hawaii. I think that Hawaii is shifting Republican slowly. I think that you are seeing Republicans make slight gains among Asian American voters. And though they might not be significant, and that won't affect Hawaii's partisan lean, I do think in terms of margin, it's shifting a little bit Republican, but it does vary depending on the election. There's something in California. California's population was going down the last couple of years, but it's stopped doing so necessarily, at least in terms of recently. So when you're seeing people leave places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, which are very democratic, um, obviously it's going to shift California a little bit rightward, but you could see that change easily over time. But as of currently, I do think California is shifting like 0.2%, not dramatically, but I do think it's shifting a little bit right. And it's a very similar thing with Washington and Oregon. I think that where you're seeing growth mainly in Washington and Oregon is in Portland. Or, Portland and Seattle have been losing population as of recently, but you are seeing these suburban counties around Portland and around Washington shift in Democrats' favor. And with that, I do expect that to continue shifting these states leftward over time. Very similar thing with California, white, but rightward. In Idaho, I think that Democrats are gaining ground in Idaho in terms of not enough to win, but the major parts of the state, like Boise, are trending in Democrats' favor, and that is where most of the population lives. And it's not going to be anywhere near enough to flip Idaho, but in terms of actual margin, you'll probably see the Republican margin in Idaho go down as time goes on. This is a very controversial topic, but I do think that Nevada is actually trending left. And the reason why is the places in Nevada that are growing are Clark County, there, Washoe County, and Nevada is actually a minority majority state, which means that Nevada is one of the few states in the country where there are more people of color than white people in Nevada. And we know that people of color vote Democratic. And obviously, on the last two federal elections in Nevada, you saw Nevada shift right slightly, but that's mainly because Latino voters aren't turning out to vote like this just because of the demographics in Nevada aren't coming out to the polls. But in a more balanced election, like probably 2024 future elections, the demographics in Nevada benefit Democrats a lot more than Republicans, just based off of the fact of what Nevada looks like on an ethnic scale. And that's something that's somewhat controversial, but I necessarily stand by that. Going back to Alaska, I think the Alaska is turning Democratic, mainly because of more traditional conservative voters that are shifting Democrat, as we know, as well as more Native American voters turning out to the polls, as well as a lot of military voters, which obviously the younger generations in the military, like myself, and not just myself, but many other people, most people that are, I guess, that are joining the military, whatever, are a lot more left wing than past military recruits. So that's also one of the major factors. It's causing Alaska to shift Democratic, as well as the state of Utah, where Democrats are also improving, in Salt Lake City and a lot of other parts of Utah. You're seeing this where a lot of these places are shifting left. Utah actually shifted right because it was a third party candidate on the ballot. But Utah is definitely trending left. This is Mitt Romney won by 48 points. Donald Trump won by 20. So a 28-point shift for Democrats. Massive gains there. In Arizona, I think that Arizona is obviously trending left. Massive gains in terms of the Hispanic and Latino population, as well as a lot of these former Republican conservative voters are shifting in Democrats' favor. So that's going to help Democrats tremendously in a state like Arizona and New Mexico. New Mexico is also becoming rapidly more Hispanic, and that's going to rapidly benefit Democrats, obviously, as we've seen for the last decade. This is a state Georgia Bush was able to win back in 2004, as well as Nevada. And you see Democrats have picked up these states and, pretty much won in almost every federal election since. So Democrats should be fine there, as well as in Colorado, one of the fastest left trending states in the country. I think that with the growth you've seen in the Denver area, as well as the other parts of the state, even in Republican areas like Colorado Springs, where you are seeing Republicans lose ground, 12-point shift in this county, just all across the state of Colorado, where Democrats are improving with a rising Hispanic Latino population, as well as these suburban college-educated voters turning against Republicans. It should help Democrats there. In Montana, I think that Montana is one of the states where Democrats are slightly improving in, is with the youth generation, with younger voters and with women voters, which are pretty much pro-choice. You are seeing Democrats make grounds in places like Missoula, um, and a lot of these other places where the majority of the population lives in Montana. But regardless, I still think Republicans will do pretty well there. I think that Wyoming is trending Republican. This is a lot of rural, working class voters. And that's a place where Republicans benefit the most with white working class voters in particular. With that, they should feel pretty confident with their margins in Wyoming. North and South Dakota for very similar reasons, where you're seeing Republicans make massive gains with rural and working class voters, which is basically the whole electorates in these states. And with that should really increase Republican chances in all of those states. In Nebraska, I do think that in Nebraska's second and first district, as well as the state, is trending left, but Nebraska's third district, similar to Wyoming and a lot of other parts of the country, is trending Republican. But places like Omaha and Lincoln in Nebraska are trending dramatically in Democrats' favor, as we saw 10-point shift in Sharkey County, 9-point shift in Douglas County, which is where Omaha is, and these other big shifts. I'm trying to find the county Lincoln's in. 7-point shifts here. Democrats are improving in the majority where the majority of the population lives. That's going to shift Nebraska to the left, even though it probably won't be enough to flip Nebraska as a state because of how Republican Nebraska's third district is. In Kansas, I think that Kansas is trending left, one of the fastest left trending states in the country. And that's because 1 in 5 voters in Kansas live in the Kansas City suburbs outside of Missouri. The biggest county in Kansas is Johnson County. And you're saying that, these counties in this area, especially Johnson County, where 1 in 4 voters in the state of Kansas live, is trending dramatically in Democrats' favor, as well as Wichita is trending Democratic as well. Where most people in Kansas live is trending Democrat. Republicans are going to continue gaining in some of these rural areas, but we know that most people live in the suburbs, so that's going to shift Kansas to the left as time goes on, as well as Oklahoma for a very similar reason, where you're seeing, even though cities like Oklahoma City, for example, the suburbs around Oklahoma City are shifting left, as well as Tulsa. And the rural areas of Oklahoma are going to continue trending in Republicans' favor. But regardless, that's not where the majority of the population lives. So you're going to see Oklahoma narrow up in Democrats' favor as the time goes on, as well as in Texas, where Texas has a very high, dramatic rise in the Hispanic Latino voter turnout participation. We know that's something that's going to benefit Democrats as time goes on. You did see Donald Trump make pretty sizable gains in the Rio Grande Valley with these rural Hispanic voters in the past, but it was not enough to counteract voters in Dallas and Fort Worth, as well as in Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. So with that, Democrats should realistically be fine in terms of continuing their margins and shifting Texas and left, because the places in Texas that are going the most are Houston or Dallas or Austin or San Antonio and their metro areas. And we know those places are shifting Democrat because of Democrats including college-educated voters, with the Hispanic Latino population increasing, as well as some of these Black voters that lived in big cities in the West are moving to Texas. So we know that you also see the Asian American population going up in Texas. A lot of things that benefit Democrats. So with that, you're going to see Texas trend in Democrats' favor as time goes on, and we're already seeing it now. That's a really negative thing for Republicans in the future. So the South is a place where I expect the whole South, excluding Arkansas. I think that Arkansas is trending Republican. I think that Arkansas is one of those few states in the South where you're not seeing the Black population increase, but you are seeing, Republicans continue to make gains with white boomers and working class voters with no Black voters in the state to counteract that. So with that, you're going to see Arkansas probably turn Republican, but Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, as well as Georgia and North Carolina are going to continue trending Democratic, mainly because the Black population in these states is growing at significantly faster rates compared to the white population in the state. And as we saw in Georgia and North Carolina, that's benefiting Democrats tremendously. And in North Carolina's case, a lot of these states, Democrats are struggling to get Black voters out to the polls. But regardless, with more than to offer, the more Democratic votes that you have to offer, and you're seeing that in all of these states. Like look at Jackson, look at Memphis, look at Nashville, look at all of these places with big cities in the South. So you're seeing reverse migration take place in these states, and even if it's like Alabama, Tennessee won't be enough to flip them, of course, but it will be enough to narrow them down. And with better turnout organizations, these states can definitely narrow. Georgia and North Carolina are already, Georgia's already Democratic leaning. North Carolina is a very competitive swing state. So with that, you're already seeing it take effect in a lot of these places. It just depends on voter turnout efforts. I do think Florida is trending Republican, mainly because of Republicans cutting deep into Democrats' margins with Hispanic Latino voters in Florida, in particular Cuban voters, as well as making continuous gains with working class voters across Florida, mainly Pan region, which is going to benefit Republicans tremendously in the state of Florida as time goes on. And you could see Florida trend Democratic or stop trending Republican just because of demographics. But as of now, I'm very confident Republicans are going to continue gaining in Florida unless you see a major change in terms of how Florida is perceived for the National Democratic Party. I do think that Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia are trending in Republicans' favor for very similar reasons. Democrats are losing their base in Missouri. You're seeing St. Louis lose population, as well as Kansas City somewhat stagnating. So Democrats aren't necessarily getting votes anywhere in Missouri. And Republicans are making massive gains with working class and rural voters, and very similar thing with Kentucky and West Virginia, where rural working class voters are trending dramatically in Republicans' favor, while Democrats don't necessarily have a demographic group they're necessarily improving with in these states. In Iowa is one of the worst states for Democrats because Iowa does not have a demographic group that Democrats can rely on. Like, for example, even in Ohio, which is also trending Republican, Democrats can rely on black voters in some of these big cities like Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, while there are no black voters really in Iowa. There's not a lot of college educated voters in Iowa. The only thing that Democrats have in Iowa is a lot of these youth and college voters in Iowa. Besides that, Democrats don't necessarily have any group to benefit from in Iowa. So basically, it's just all lopsided in Republicans' favor. It's also Illinois and Indiana because Chicago's losing population, as well as Gary and a lot of these other cities in Indiana. And even though in Illinois' case it might be a Democratic state overall, but in terms of how it's actually shifting, it is going to benefit Democrats, benefit Republicans as time goes on. Republicans making gains with working class voters and mainly black voters in places like Chicago losing in population, which is going to allow Republicans to perform better across the state. In Virginia, Democrats are continuing to improve in the DC suburban area, as you're saying, as well as the state black population increasing. So with Democrats making gains with black voters and making gains with in the suburbs, it will continue shifting Virginia leftward. I want to go back to the South, for example, and just mention something in this region. In the South, even though these states are shifting in Democrats' favor, for example, Georgia is never going to become a very Democratic state just because of the fact that the South is so racially polarized, where almost all black voters in the South were Democrat, almost all white voters in the South were Republican. So Republicans have a very strong foothold in all of these states. While Democrats rely on one demographic group to win. Like if black turnout goes down in these states, the Democratic chances of winning is impossible. So with that, Republicans will never necessarily be too out of reach in the South just because of that, and it's something that you've seen. So I did want to bring that up before moving to the Rust Belt. In the Rust Belt, I do think Minnesota is trending in Democrats' favor because of places like the Minneapolis area. Minnesota is a very college-educated state, and we're seeing college-educated voters trending in Democrats' favor. I do think that Democrats can lose ground in some of these working-class parts of Minnesota, but where most people live is in Minneapolis. Like, for example, Joe Biden got 533,000 votes in Minnesota and Minneapolis, in Hennepin County alone. He only got 1.7 million in the whole state, so he got about almost a third of his whole vote share just in one county. So with those places continuing to trend in Democrats' favor, Democrats will continue making up ground in Minnesota and probably improving. In other Rust Belt states, I do expect Republicans to improve, mainly because Democrats are losing their base in these big cities, where you're seeing voters in Milwaukee, in Detroit, and Philadelphia trend in Republicans' favor. And that's something that's going to hurt Democrats tremendously across these states because Democrats rely tremendously on these voters to win. And you're seeing Democrats make gains in the suburbs and make gains in the college towns in these states, but it's not enough to counteract their most Democratic voters. And that's something I've already mentioned in my past video. And with Republicans making significant gains with rural and working class voters, Democrats will start losing ground in these states. And I know that Democrats have been winning here as of recently, but they've mainly been winning because Trump's base is not coming out. And Democrats have gotten really good at turning out their base in these majority black cities. So with that, as long as Republicans can continue their gain with the working class voters, and Democrats continue losing population in their big cities and their strongholds, this is a region of the country that will continue trending Republicans' favor. DC is actually losing black population, so I think the DC is going to obviously be very Democratic, but it's going to trend in Republicans' favor as time goes on. In Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Vermont, these states are all trending Democratic because these states have very huge college-educated populations. As long as you keep seeing Democrats making gains of college-educated voters, you're going to see these states shift trend in Democrats' favor. In New York, I think that New York is actually turning Republicans' favor because New York City is losing population. And as the entire West Point and Northeast, you're seeing Republicans make gains with working class and rural voters, and that's going to continue um, benefiting Republicans narrowly. I don't think, obviously, New York is going to flip. Very similar thing with Alabama and the South. But in terms of actually the margin in New York is going to go down because Democrats are losing their base in places like New York City. And with that, you're going to continue seeing the state of New York trend slightly in Republicans' favor. And in New Hampshire, I think New Hampshire is trending Democratic just because New Hampshire is a very college educated state, and we know college educated voters are trending in Republicans' favor. So that is going to continue trending New Hampshire leftward. And in Maine, I think that Maine's second district is trending Republicans' favor. It's very working class, rural, white district, and that's going to continue shifting Maine in Republicans' favor, as well as Maine's first and Maine's estate, because we know that working class, I mean, the college educated voters turn out at higher rates than working class voters. Maine first district is a very college educated district, and with that, it's going to dominate Maine second district in terms of shifts. So it's going to shift Maine to the left, but we are seeing that both of these districts are trending in opposite directions because of the college education gap across the country. And I do expect that to benefit Democrats narrowly because of just higher turnout from college educated voters relative to non college educated voters in Maine, which would trend Maine Democratic. So again, that's my prediction. I have 283 electoral votes trending Democrats favor, 255 trending Republicans favor. Basically, summary is some of the West Coast states are trending in Republicans' favor, as well as the North, the whole Northeast, this whole region, as well as the South, and some of these southwestern states are trending in Democrats' favor, as well as some of the northeastern states. So you are seeing a lot of political trends across the country, and I just wanted to make a video discussing that. The next video is going to be about how Donald Trump could win in 2024 and what would be his pathway to the White House if he did have a chance to win. So make sure to tune into that, you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning into my video. Make sure you have a nice day.